In this video, we'll review how to connect and configure analog and digital inputs on a BRNKL device. First, locate the 10-pin connector on the BRNKL device. This connector provides 7 input channels. Each input can be configured as either an analog or digital input, depending on how it is set up in the system. In this example, we are using input 1. The red wire is connected to a 19-volt source. That voltage is now being read by the BRNKL, and we can see it displayed in the BRNKL Device Manager under Input 1. All other inputs currently show 0 volts because they are not connected. Next, open the Settings page and select Inputs. This is where we configure each input. Within the input settings, you will first see the Monitor option. Monitor enables or disables the tile that appears on the Device Manager dashboard. If you would like to generate alerts for this input, enable the Alert toggle. If you want the alert to trigger even when the system is disarmed, enable the Critical Alert option. You can also rename the input. In this example, we will name it Test Input. The input type is currently set to battery, which is treated as an analog input. There are several predefined library types available depending on the sensor you are connecting. Since this example is measuring voltage, we will keep it configured as voltage. Next, we can configure alert thresholds. For example, we could set a high threshold of 20 volts and a low threshold of 10 volts. You can also apply a slope and offset formula if the sensor requires calibration or scaling. If an alert threshold is exceeded, the BRNKL can optionally trigger an output device. For example, this could activate a siren or strobe light connected to one of the device outputs. You can also configure the time between alerts. This setting determines how frequently alerts can repeat if the condition continues. For example, you might set this to 15 minutes to prevent nuisance alerts. If the value is set to none, the system will generate an alert every time the threshold condition is triggered. Once the configuration is complete, click Save. In this example, the system is configured to generate an alert when the input voltage drops below 10 volts. The current input voltage is 19 volts. Next, we will arm the system and disconnect the wire to trigger the alert. After disconnecting the wire, the input voltage drops below the configured threshold, and an alert appears in the notifications window. Now let's configure the input as a digital input instead of an analog input. When configured as a digital input, the system no longer displays the voltage value and instead shows a simple on or off state. For example, we can configure this input as shore power. In this configuration, the high state is labeled connected and the low state is labeled disconnected. In this case, we would generate an alert when the signal goes low. After saving the configuration, return to the dashboard. Because the wire is currently disconnected, the input shows disconnected. When the wire is reconnected, the status changes to connected. If the wire is removed again, the system will return to disconnected and generate the configured alert. Another common input on the BRNKL device is a bilge pump input. To configure this, select the input type as bilge. The high name defaults to pumping, which indicates that the bilge pump is actively removing water from the vessel. The low name defaults to idle, meaning the bilge pump is not running. For bilge monitoring, alerts are typically configured to trigger on the high state. One important setting is the delay. The delay determines how long the bilge pump must run before the system recognizes that it has turned on. This setting is useful for bilge pumps that briefly cycle every few seconds to check for water. In these cases, it is recommended to set the delay to approximately 2 seconds to prevent false alerts. Next is the long period alert. This alert triggers when the bilge pump runs more than a configured number of times within a longer time window. For example, the default configuration generates an alert if the bilge pump runs more than 10 times within a 24-hour period. Next is the short period alert. This alert monitors for rapid cycling of the bilge pump. By default, the system generates an alert if the bilge pump runs 3 times within 30 minutes. Both of these thresholds can be customized based on the vessel and installation. Another option is the bilge on-time limit. This alert is triggered if the bilge pump runs continuously for longer than a configured duration. The default value is 60 seconds, but some installations may prefer shorter limits, particularly in areas that are expected to remain dry. You can also enable a 24-hour count that can be displayed,